So, good evening, everybody. Hello, welcome back to the Conversations from the Trenches. And today I have with me Deepa Kannan, who is a super, super special guest. And I'm going to tell you in a second why I think she's a super special guest. The conversation we are having today may be a little unconventional for the times that we live in, and yet it is a very, very critical conversation for us to have. Why do we need to eat, pray, and love ourselves to be holistically well? What we are talking about is a very integrated approach of integrating the needs of the needs, the asks, the messages of the body, mind, and spirit, so that we are holistically well. And I have with me somebody who I personally believe, from observation, from experience, is one of the best possible resources on the subject. Welcome, Deepa. Thank you so much for joining me as a friend. I am super excited to have this conversation with you. But having seen your work, let me also say I am so honored and privileged that you agreed to join me today. Deepa.
Thank you, Rekha. Can you hear me okay? And can you hear, am I okay on my end? Great. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure. And as I told you a few days ago, that this was one conversation that I was really looking forward to having because of our own soul connection. And you and I are very much connected by the soul and through the Divine Mother, who I think really lives within all of us as women. And I think the conversation that we are having today in terms of body, mind, and soul of women is also all about the Divine Mother, really. And it's not about religion, it's more about just celebrating the women that we are within all of us and how we connect to each other. So, thank you for having me.
Absolute. I mean, I agree 200% with you, but you already know where I stand on on the matter of the sacred feminine. So, just to give, I'm pretty sure most of the people in my network know who Deepa is. Just in case there are a few people who don't know who Deepa is, right? Deepa is an allied functional medicine practitioner. She's a yoga acharya, she's an author, and she's the host of the incredibly successful Sleep Whisperer podcast. Now, what I personally think of Deepa is, having known her for a very long time, keep the titles apart, keep the designations apart, keep all of that apart. What I have experienced and observed of Deepa is she has this uncanny knack of bringing in very ancient wisdom, blending it with modern science, and offering us extremely unique integrated solutions or answers for our healing body, mind, and soul. But that's as much as I know. For me, this is very complicated terminology. I still haven't deconstructed it fully. I just know this journey of hers and what she does resonates with me at a soul level. So, Deepa, as someone who has known you for a very long time, who I really, really believe that what you do is so relevant for our times. I would really like for you to help us understand your work better. Can I invite you to share?
Lovely, Rekha. Yes, lovely. And I'd love to say that, when you mention the ancient wisdom and kind of science, yes, that is a passionate area for me. But let me just break that down because it's really important to understand when we say ancient wisdom, what do we mean? When we say science, what do we mean? Because truly, that I think health is quite fragmented today. So, everyone is looking through a lens, a very specific lens. So the usually in ancient wisdom you'll have the yoga acharyas, you'll have people in meditation, you'll have people in Ayurveda, and sometimes the lens becomes so narrow that it becomes just that lens, and sometimes we're not looking at it that could this lens be an adjunct, could it be a complementary part of other areas. And then when we go down the route of science, and then we are looking through that narrow lens, be it lab work, be it research. And research is a huge area I think we need to talk about because
Yeah.
I personally feel that we're talking about research, we're bringing a lot of emphasis to research, but are we missing the link that if there's no research for ancient practices, does that mean they're not validated? I mean, these are decades old, thousands of years old practice, and just because there's no research to validate it doesn't mean that it's not valid or it's not useful to us. However, what I started to find was every area has this narrow lens, and um, we tend to get caught up in that because we don't also want to grow as practitioners. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with this, Rekha, is that every single year by December, we break down our whole practice. We look through all that went wrong the previous year and what can we
Yeah.
do better the next year. So
Yeah.
our practice is just a new practice every single January. And
Mm.
when we say ancient wisdom and cutting edge science of functional medicine, what does that mean? So we're trying to bring in the protocols from ancient wisdom, age old practices, which a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times I think ancient practices, they are not so invasive. So they're not really
Yeah.
poking at the body. They're not
Yeah.
IV
Yeah.
infusions. They're not ozone therapy. They're like very
Yeah.
non-invasive, safe practices. So can we do
Yeah.
all of that before we look at the body, before we look at what do we need to do further beyond that? And then if we
Mm.
can verify that by then looking into aspects such as the science of labs and seeing that somebody's on a state of balance in everything that they need to be
Yeah.
physiologically, then we've got this magical combination. And
Mm.
I'll just say one thing, Rekha, that and when you hear functional medicine, my problem with functional medicine many times is that it's very invasive therapies. So you'll find that
Mm.
a lot of the clinics offer these tools like IV infusions and ozone
Mm.
therapy and heavy detoxification practices like
Mm.
chelation therapy. And personally, I feel some of those things are unnecessary, that you
Mm-hmm.
could begin a lot with the ancient practices.
Yeah.
And then you could cross verify that with the lab. So that's what we say when we say the intersection of ancient wisdom and functional medicine. And that's where our practice is. It's integrating these two aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, we are, when you said eat, pray, love. So if we were to look at Eat, Pray, Love itself as a model, because as you know, that's
Yeah.
my absolutely favorite movie. So if we
Mm-hmm.
look at Eat, Pray, Love, actually these come together in ways where I don't know if you've heard in Ayurveda, ahar, vihar, sleep, and sexual
Mm.
activity, these four
Yeah.
pillars which are described in Ayurveda. And really, when we are saying eat, pray, love, what are we trying to say? We are saying eat
Yeah.
as in ahar, the right nutrition, right? And
Right.
when we say pray, we're talking about our spiritual well being. Are we whole as a
Absolutely.
and when we say spirituality, Rekha, we are not talking about religion, of course. We are talking
Yeah.
about the fact that are we whole as a person? Because if we are not whole and comfortable with ourselves when we are in solitude, we cannot
Yeah.
then offer love, we cannot receive love, we cannot be in
Yeah.
these vibrant, good relationships.
Yeah.
And that's where I love the movie, because the order it's juxtaposed of eat, pray, love is because if you notice right at the beginning of the movie, she's actually a very successful person professionally, but
Yeah.
she's so
Yeah.
broken physiologically,
Yeah.
psychologically, emotionally, spiritually,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
then she goes on this journey, and first she's healing her body using food. So you're not kind of scared of food, which is what has
Yeah.
happened today. Do you know that a lot of
Yeah.
people with chronic health issues, they typically end up in a state where they're extremely scared to eat. So they think this
Yeah.
is going to harm them, that is going to
Yeah.
harm them. So we
Yeah.
need to bring back a healthy aspect of eating. And Rekha, um, I don't know if you've seen this, that sometimes people will try to add a lot of healthy ingredients into food.
Yeah,
And even if it tastes terrible, they will consume it with the feeling that it's great for them. But for me,
yeah,
if the food doesn't taste well, if it doesn't
yeah,
look beautiful, if it doesn't smell great, if you
yeah,
can't enjoy it with all your
Mhm.
senses, then it's not
Yeah,
really going to nourish your body, because you could
yeah,
be putting the best ingredients into your body, and if you're not going to take it in with all your senses, your body is not going to know how to utilize it, right? And that's what we're talking about even in the movie when we say eat. And then when we say pray, we're talking about, are we nourishing our soul? And have you heard about sattva, rajas, and tamas in
I have, I
ancient
have,
wisdom? So,
I have.
so you go from tamas, which is the energy of inertia or potential energy. Rajas is like restlessness or
Yeah,
action. And then we
yeah,
move towards the state of balance, which is sattva. And all that we do with our food, when we nourish our bodies the right way, then you reach a natural state where you're in a state of sattva, and you don't have to force yourself to feel positive and be positive, because the body is in such a state of balance that you naturally reach that state of
yeah, yeah,
emotional, mental, and spiritual balance. And when you're in a state of balance, then you're able to give and receive love equally, which I really think is the epitome of love and
absolutely.
relationships, that we need to be where we can give equally, but we are also open to receiving equally. And
Yeah,
that's also where the missing link today in a lot of relationship, there's one who's always giving a lot and the other who's always taking a lot, and
mm,
the balance is skewed, and that's where it leads to emotional pain, physiological imbalance, and
yeah.
spiritual unrest. I know I probably went on two more, and
No, 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 no,
probably
no, no.
off tangent.
No, no, no. You know what? I want to actually, when you were talking about something, I wanted to share a very personal experience as to why an integrated approach to body, mind, and spirit is so important to me, because I've been the beneficiary of it twice in my life. And this is
Mm,
something a lot of people don't know about me, but I was born with club feet. And back in the 70s, when I was born, the only way to correct club feet was through a series of protracted, prolonged surgeries, which were extremely painful for a child. My grandfather, who was a big believer, my family, I come from a background where everybody believes in Ayurveda and almost fanatically about the ancient ways of healing. They had an Ayurvedic physician who massaged my legs straight. And I can walk today without club feet because my legs were massaged straight with zero invasive procedures,
mm,
nothing at all. So not only was my
mm,
legs massaged, I was massaged, and then my parents bought in the scientific aspect, which was they got corrective shoes to stabilize my feet and to make sure that it stayed in that way. So that was the first time I was a beneficiary of it. The second time, I think, was when I was almost 30 years old. Due to certain personal circumstances, I was in a situation where my liver had collapsed. And my first, experience of it was I went, like most people in the mainstream, I went to the doctor. And when I went to the doctor, they medicated me and they medicated me even more. Now, what happened was when you have a liver that is already weak, more medication only complicates it further. And before we knew it, I was in a state of near collapse. My bilirubin was at 13 or odd. And then medical science said there's nothing we can do about her. So my mother took me to an Ayurvedic physician who started to say, let's just get all this out. Let's just figure it out through the body. Let's deal with the body. And I remember while I was going through that whole experience, he would call me. So, I was getting emotional support, I was getting spiritual support. And I do believe it was that very holistic approach from the doctor, which actually allowed me to get back on my feet. So, what you say about combining, understanding what ancient wisdom is and not pushing it to the side because we don't have scientific evidence, uh, is, it's something that we have to relook at because there's stuff that works and which may be easier and better for our body. So I'm just going to take a quick moment to say hello to Uday and Tiffany who have joined us, and they're both very excited about the topic. So thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, please do drop it in the chat. We will get Deepa to answer them for us. So Deepa, I want to go a little forward here, and I want to understand because when I met you first, you were a yoga acharya, and you were following, you'd received it, you'd learned yoga, and you'd received the wisdom from gurus, and you were, disseminating it down the line. But from yoga, right, from when I met you to now, how did you come to the space of integrated healing? Because you're working on, the body. You're working, you have the Sleep Whisperer podcast. You're doing yoga. You're doing multiple things which cater to the entire the body, mind, the emotions, and the spirit. So tell me, how have you arrived at this space? What has your journey been like, and what actually drives your work?
I think if you ask me what drives my work, I will probably say my son.
Yes.
And many of you, if you know me, you'll know my son was born with a condition called salt wasting congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And he came to me when I was much older and in my second marriage. And seeing him with adrenal issues, and we were running to the emergency room a lot in the first year. And
Mhm.
he was perpetually in the ICU. And I think that's what prompted the journey into integrative health, because I was trying to ask the doctor, will food help him to not be in the hospital so much? And that's where it started,
Mhm.
because typically we don't acknowledge the power of food. And
Yes.
therefore, a lot of times it's ignored. And that's why I
Yes.
started to search. And I first went into general nutrition, and then I also found nutrition was a bit fixated, because it was exactly about calorie counting, portion control, BMI
Yeah.
measurements, and I really didn't think
Yeah.
that was the approach to nutrition. And it
Yeah.
was purely fortitude that I came across this space of functional medicine. I think
Mhm.
destiny really brought it in front of my eyes. And the
Mhm.
moment I saw that, I knew this is the path that I'm meant to be on. And I know you can resonate that with that, Rekha, because you totally believe in listening to the signs and intuition and going down the
Yeah.
path as you're guided by your instinct. And
Yeah.
that's how it happened. And coming
Mhm.
into the path of functional medicine. But
Mhm.
then again, I started to notice that functional medicine a lot of times was a bit specific in terms of testing and protocols. And so, I mean, I said, like, I've got this 2 decades of yoga experience, but how can I bring the two together? So how can I get the best of both? And not
Yeah.
box myself into something where I'm forced to follow specific protocols, because end of the day, when we say individuality, we can't trust the same protocol on 10 different people. Everyone is so unique. And
Yeah.
they're going to teach us, because every single day I'm learning from clients what I don't know. And you need to be open to say that I don't know, but let me figure this out with you. And I think that
Yeah.
is really very, very critical to anybody in any kind of a practice, that we should be able to recognize when we don't know something and look deeper and dig deeper. And as long as we have curiosity and we've got the inclination to help, we'll always figure it out.
Hmm. So Uday has a comment to say. He says yoga practice is not something everyone does here in Nigeria, and I see it's a secret healing. Not every one of us know. What does yoga practice help the human achieve, Deepa?
Ooh, that's a very deep question, Uday. Thank you for asking that. But I mean, that's probably going to take several lifetimes to get through. But there's a beautiful saying in yoga that all the yoga poses that people learn, and there's so many goals that we have. I want to do the headstand tomorrow. I want to be able to do a full chakra tomorrow. But there's this beautiful saying that all these postures that we're trying to learn in yoga have the same single goal, and that is to allow us to be comfortable in our body, to be able to sit silently in meditation for longer and longer. And I think along the way, yoga has lost that, because now it's become a lot about what is the pose, and we are in
Yeah.
the age of Instagram yogis and yoginis, Rekha, because 20 years ago when I started yoga, there was no Instagram, but today
Yes.
it's about what can we do better, what can we show better. And truly, I don't know if you've ever seen on my Instagram, there might be one single video on yoga, but otherwise, none of us post anything. And this is because the goal is always that whatever you can do in yoga, it's not about the physical aspects, it's just so that you get comfortable in your body and you can sit for longer and longer. So Uday, if I were to answer that question for you, it is that it's really so that you can discover who you are, you can learn to be whole within yourself without being guided by anybody, without wanting to be anybody. And that's just to become comfortable with yourself. I would say
Yeah.
that's the simplest answer I can give you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Deepa, you make a very important point. And this is why when I wrote up about our conversation, one of the words I was very intentional about using was yoga acharya. Because there is a tradition, the lineage matters, the medium of instruction matters. I do notice that today anybody can do yoga. You can learn it online, you can get a certification. The You can learn to do asanas, but there is so much of wisdom in the back engine, your breathing, your experience of yourself, just holding your pose and experiencing your senses and connecting with the universe. You have so many aspects to it which don't come through in a short term course, or it doesn't come through on in the way it has become. But exactly like with food, like with emotional and mental challenges, or situations that we have, it's become very surface level. It's become very, let me put it out there, and not really, it doesn't go deeper, right? So I think this kind of already leads into the question that I wanted to ask you next, because I was going to ask you, why do you think the work you do is so necessary for our world, particularly for women, right? Why do you think this is very important for women, the work you do?
Yeah, I this is something, Rekha, I think I mentioned to you casually on a conversation that I had, and I really want to bring awareness to mental health in women's,
Yes.
in the context of women.
Yes.
And I know that what is good is that we have become a lot more aware of mental health. We are speaking a lot about mental health, but what is missing today in the mental health space is that no one is looking at physiology. So, you remember when we started this conversation, I spoke about why eat, pray, love is in that order, right? You
Yeah.
begin with eating to nourish yourself. Only then
Yeah.
can your soul be in a state where you can actually sit and be spiritual and mentally balanced. And it's hard to sit and meditate when your body's in a high state of inflammation. So
Yeah.
coming back to women and mental health, that what is missing is that, and I asked this to somebody who's very involved in mental health, that do doctors consider inflammatory markers and markers of nutrient deficiencies before going into diagnosis and medication? And it's missing a lot. So you'll find that even people who are very conscious about health, they are still medicated before they are assessed for micronutrient deficiencies. And
Mm.
key aspects like B12 and iron and omega 3, I mean, before you correct these things, to be medicating someone is, I feel, an injustice to them. And even if someone is on medication, and I'm not anti medication, so please don't get me wrong, what I'm saying is that even if you were to be on medication, you could still do yourself so much good by just looking at all these physiological root causes, because they can support your journey towards balance and mental clarity in so many powerful ways.
Deepa, can I just dial back for a moment, okay? Because I'm going to connect two
Yes.
dots that has popped up in our conversation, and we're just like, dancing very tantalizingly in front of me. So when we started this conversation, you mentioned that there are people who eat and they put a lot of healthy ingredients and they force them and they eat it because it's good for them vis-a-vis they enjoy it. And now we are talking about inflammation, right? So inflammation is something that I mean, I am very interested in inflammation because I have allergies, I have anxiety, I am prone to asthmatic attacks, and it's all I have learned is because my body, it's how inflamed my body is that can often tip me over the thing. Can we talk a little bit about the inflamed body? Because I think it'll be good for us to go deeper than looking at food in terms of calories and macros to really how is it affecting our health? How is it affecting our body? Why are we people having chronic illnesses? Why so many women have chronic illnesses, right? Why do as somebody who manages anxiety, I know that a dose of magnesium can help me a lot, making sure that I have certain nutrients. Just being aware of it and correcting that can help me get on top of my anxiety, and I've observed this personally. So can you tell us a little bit about our relationship with food today, right now, and if you've noticed anything in focus to women, I would love to hear that too.
Yeah, for sure. I think first of all, when you say the inflamed body, Rekha, what is the inflamed body, right? When we say inflammation, what are we looking at? So if we'll
Mhm.
peek into somebody's labs, we can gain that there is a state of inflammation because there's elevated markers of inflammation such as CRP and so many other aspects. You can also be in a state of inflammation if you have very low levels of vitamin D, low levels of iron, low
Yeah.
levels of B12, omega 3. So, labs is one thing. And let's take a quick segue into the world of Ayurveda, because when we say inflammation and imbalance, what are we talking about in the perspective of Ayurveda? So, there is vata aggravation, which typically is where you're very, very restless, and that can happen a lot when we are multitasking. So, you've heard this phrase that women are multitaskers. We are truly
Yeah.
not, and multitasking is the biggest injustice we can do to ourselves as women.
Mm.
When we are trying to send an email and reply to a message, and then we are completing something on the side, and that's the first thing that inflames us as women. And then
Mm.
when we look at when you said women, what are we doing to ourselves? So when we look at somebody's hormones, before hormones can be in a state of balance, we need to have our blood sugar in a state of balance.
Mm.
And if you start your morning meal with high sugar, which is a typical Indian diet,
Yeah.
where it's predominantly we are eating grains. And no, I'm not anti-grain, but when we are predominantly eating grain in the morning, we are setting ourselves up for fluctuating blood sugar all day long.
Mm.
And when someone wants to know, how do I know if my blood sugar is in a state of imbalance? Well, if you're going to require any snacks or any food before your next meal, 5 hours later, your blood sugar is in a state of imbalance. It's not
Mm.
normal to need snacks between meal. If you need snacks, your blood sugar is off. And I'll take you back to one more thing about ancient wisdom, because a lot of people who speak about local Indian foods, we're talking about eating very frequently, eating every 2 hours, eating every 3 hours. But if you go back to most ancient
Yeah.
Indian texts, that is not the paradigm at all. Eating too often is actually something which is harmful to your body. So you're not
Yeah.
supposed to eat more than 3 times a day, and you give enough space between two meals where there's at least 5 hours, so the body
Mm.
just keeps itself in a state of balance, right?
Right.
So if you have blood sugar imbalance, which you can see as requiring these snacks very often, then most likely you're going to have some hormone fluctuations.
Yeah.
When we're talking about hormones, Rekha, let's go back to looking at when a woman goes in India to a gynecologist. Is any gynecologist checking her hormones to see is it
No.
in a state of balance? No, nobody is checking that,
No.
right?
Yeah.
However, when there's imbalance between hormones in women, that is what is predisposing a young girl to attain early puberty. That is what is making teenage girls have terrible PMS, polycystic ovaries, fibroids,
Mm, mm,
acne. That's what's predisposing women to have infertility issues or problems in pregnancy. And
mm.
post menopause, that's what is causing women to have female cancers, be it breast cancer, cervical cancer, uterine cancer. They're all fed by hormonal dysregulation. So I think
Yeah.
one of the greatest things that we should do for ourselves as women is to always see that our hormones are in a state of balance.
Mm.
And if we are struggling with anxiety, since you mentioned anxiety, if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, irritability, anger, all of that, we need to be looking at our hormones because that's the root of this mental disequilibrium.
Right, right. Um, sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah. So, Deepa, you make such valid points. And when you were talking, one of the things that crossed my mind was you and I should do a conversation about menopause by itself, because we are seeing so many women. Menopause is not something we talk about. Like even a woman's hormonal progression, like you've just very clearly shown us a cycle. We don't talk much about it. It's a conversation that's always pushed under the carpet. We don't, and it's all Chinese whispers, right? There's a lot of wisdom that's being passed around as Chinese whispers, and a lot is lost in translation. So I was just thinking we really do need to do a conversation about women, their hormones, and what is it like at each stage. But for now, I can see there's a question from Uday. Uday, I'm going to request you to be a little patient because we'll take it in a little bit so that we don't disrupt the flow of the conversation right now. But now that we're talking about, the body and the hormones and all of it, something I want to ask you about something that is very popularly used amongst women. Women are urged to do this, which is about self-care and self-love, right? And I have certain perceptions about the way people perceive self-love and actually act on it, but I would like to know from you, how would you define self-love and self-care in the context of body, mind, and spirit?
Okay, so actually, Rekha, this is very, very clearly listed out in ancient text in Ayurveda. It's called Dinacharya, which is
Mm-hmm.
actually your daily routine. And
Mm-hmm.
today we are talking about this a lot in all over the world. We're talking about the morning routine, the evening routine, the bedtime routine. But the Dinacharya in Ayurveda is actually what do we do to show ourselves love, which keeps our body, mind, and spirit in a state of balance. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you structure a Dinacharya to help yourself? So, what would an Ayurvedic Dinacharya look like? And I'll take you through my own Dinacharya so that it gives you
Please.
some context to truly understand how you build self care into your day.
Yeah.
And I'll start by saying that never say that you don't have time for your self care, because I just don't buy that at all. And that's the
Yeah.
first thing that you'll find women who'll say, no, I have no time, my work is so busy. Or they'll say that I need to take care of my spouse and my children, and I don't have time for myself, and that's just crap. Sorry for the ill
So,
language, but that's just it. Okay, so uh,
the
so
advantages of having a
walking through.
conversation from the trenches is you can use language within limits,
Oh,
of course,
perfect, great. Let's go for it.
because that's how we
Uh,
that's how we
so the
talk in the
thing
trenches. Go
Oh,
on.
lovely. Okay, so dinacharya, when we're talking about, I mean, when you look at my day, for example, I wake up by about 4 or 5 a.m. And then the first thing that I do is always you brush. And of course, we all brush our teeth, but do we also tongue clean? Because,
Mm.
as the oral microbiome today is a big source of study in functional medicine, that
Okay.
you'll be surprised that people with an unhealthy oral microbiome, it's even been linked to conditions like polycystic ovaries. So
Oh,
keeping our
okay.
tongue in good health with just tongue cleaning and oil pulling is a way to keep a healthy microbiome, where you have this balance of beneficial bacteria in the mouth. And remember that the mouth is actually the entry point of whatever you put in to nourish your body.
Mm.
And so, therefore, we want that to be healthy. So, if we can just
Right.
take a few moments to clean our tongue from the back to the front, and we can
Mm.
do a little bit of oil pulling and then some jalaneti. Why do we do jalaneti, the Rekha? This is an age old practice where we take salt water through the nose and leave it out of the other nose. But I wrote an article on this a few years ago, which was shared by Dr. Mark Hyman, on how
Mm.
Jalaneti actually improves blood circulation within the brain. And
Yeah.
the tendency for somebody to have hormonal migraines is reduced, or have
Yeah.
depression from poor lymphatic health. See, today we are bringing research into lymphatic, that there is a detoxification pathway within the brain. But this was all spoken about in all ancient texts, be it yoga, Ayurveda. So when we do a Shirshasana headstand, we are bringing
Yeah.
fresh blood to our brain. When we
Yeah.
do Jalaneti, we are clearing up the mucus, and we are allowing
Mhm.
ourselves to breathe better naturally. So, spending
Yeah.
a few moments with Jalaneti, doing a little bit of yoga. And I will add one more thing, which I do almost every single day, which is Abhyanga. So before the bath, taking some warm oil and rubbing the entire body. Why do we do this, Rekha? Because there's a flourishing skin microbiome on our body. And today we have so many women struggling with issues like candida and fungal
Yeah.
overgrowth,
Yeah.
and going for
Yeah.
these terribly toxic topical antifungal creams.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
were to just nourish your skin microbiome with these age old herbal oils, 5-10 minutes to rub your body and then go for a shower. What else does the Abhyanga do? It by you are telling your body that you're in love with your body. When you're
Yeah.
rubbing oil on your body, you are showing yourself love. And before you show anyone love, or before you're capable of receiving any love, you need to be loving to yourself. And
Absolutely.
rubbing oil on the body also lowers cortisol levels. Therefore, we lower our systemic inflammation. These are all non-invasive. Just think, I've told you is my dinacharya till about 8 in the morning, and I've already done so many things which are self-love, self-care,
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah.
Then you combine that with adding nutritious food. And the last thing that I will say, I won't go into details about my day, but I have a very strict switch off point, Rekha. Today is the only exception, and just for you. Otherwise, 4 or 5 p.m., phone is off, computer is off, and I'm completely cut off from the world. I
Yeah.
don't think we are so indispensable that our work world cannot be with us for 12 hours, or somebody cannot be with us without calling us for those 12 hours.
Right.
So I think it's time that we started to bring dinacharya, age old daily practices, which just start doing one every week. And before you know it, you'll have an entire day full of self love, self care,
Yeah.
supporting your body, nurturing your soul, and keeping your spirit in an absolute state of balance.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of questions. He says, what do you say about the migraine? This is very common with people. And he has a
Ah,
second question, which is there any practice to help balance the hormones?
okay, let's take the first one. First question, Uday, about the migraines, and I'm so glad you asked that question because I really don't think that migraines are something normal and that you should be popping pills for it. So that is the first thing that I will say, and I know that. There are people who eat very healthy, they're very healthy in their habits, but they don't resolve things like migraines and headaches, and they've got headache medication perpetually in their bag and they pop it every time it pops up.
Yeah,
So let's take a quick dive into all the root causes of migraines, and it starts, of course, with systemic inflammation. It has to do with poor liver health. It can be due to imbalance in hormones. It can be very low levels of omega 3, ferritin, B12, vitamin D. It can have to, and Rekha and Uday, sorry, Uday, you asked me the question that headaches can look differently based upon is it caused by vata, pitta, kapha. So the kapha headaches will typically be with congestion and stuffiness in the eyes
yeah,
and the
yeah,
sinus. The pitta headaches will be more like, from raging, like pounding headaches, which can
yeah,
come for women like at cyclical migraines, which show up at specific parts of the cycle. Right, so they can vary, they can appear so different. However, I would still go back to saying, if somebody has diagnosed someone with a migraine issue and says it's a lifelong condition, I would definitely challenge that, because it's just like the mental health, that before you look at the physical root causes, the physiological root causes, to be diagnosing and medicating is very questionable. So I definitely challenge that whole aspect of condition for life.
No, I agree 200% with you, Deepa, because I used to get migraines when I used to work. And it had nothing to do with anything. It would be because I did not sleep or properly, or I was pushing myself beyond, with my work. I was overstressing my body and my mind. Or it could be something as simple as I was traveling to a place with, humidity, and I had not rested enough, or I had not taken, I was not drinking enough. So I agree with you. And, the minute I started taking care of myself, I haven't had a migraine in years. The same goes for asthma, by the way, and even my anxiety I manage purely by just listening to my body and my mind. So, Uday says, you make us realize how most of the things we are doing is a very good way for good self care. Thanks, Deepa. He's also asked, is there any practice to help balance the hormones?
Well, it depends, yes, and I will answer this for both men and women, because really we don't want to be differentiating, because men and women both have hormones. Men have estrogen, women have testosterone. So, somewhere people tend to think that testosterone is a male hormone and estrogen
Yeah.
is a female hormone, and that's not really true. Women, men can be estrogen dominant, women can have testosterone issues, which is what is PCOS, and conditions where androgens are high. So when it comes to hormonal balance, I'd say first it goes back to the health of the liver. If the
Mm-hmm.
liver is in a state of congestion, which most often is the case when people are having hormonal issues, then you'll find that you're not able to detoxify hormone metabolites, so you're not able to release estrogen after it's been used, and therefore you become estrogen dominant. You can have hormonal issues ranging from skin issues, mood issues, anxiety, loads of conditions like fibroids, polycystic ovaries, endometriosis. So it goes back to the health of the liver. However, the health of the liver is connected to our overall digestion. And what are all the things that we're doing to ourselves which is harming our digestion today? It is eating more meals than 2 or 3 meals a day. Overeating beyond 3 meals is a big way to disrupt digestion, and this is not just me and my narrow view, it's from a lot of ancient texts.
Yeah.
Then what else are we do, Rekha? One of the biggest practices that destroys digestion is drinking cold water, putting
Yeah.
ice into everything that we drink. It shrinks the
Mm.
blood vessels in the gut, and it causes so many gut issues. And you'll find people popping antacids and digestive capsules before they're
Yeah.
even, they're guzzling this cold water all through the day, which is weakening digestion. And when we say in Ayurveda, Agni is in the digestive
Stomach.
tract,
Yeah.
and
It's in the,
Agni is,
yeah.
what do we understand? Right, but when we say Agni, we are saying fire, right? And we are putting
Yeah.
out the fire with all these cold, icy foods, and we're putting out the
Yeah.
fire with the modern smoothie culture, where we're guzzling cold smoothies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We're destroying the fire, we're killing the fire, and then we are looking towards external digestive remedies to fix what we are creating. So when we look at cause and effect, I think the first thing that we do, if we need to love ourselves, we need to look hard, honest truth at all the causes that we are doing, which is putting us into our present state of imbalance, and accepting that
Mm.
honestly and removing the triggers, removing the cause. If I'm causing something which is imbalancing my body, I have the
Mm.
power to fix that as well. I have the power to change that. It's in my hands. If I'm in a state of denial and I don't accept that these are all the things that I am doing which is disrupting my health, then I mean nothing from the outside is going to fix me. It's all in my hands.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to
Absolutely.
move away from the ostrich mentality.
Deepa, you make a very important point, and the fact of it also is one of the reasons I focus this conversation. When I was writing it up, I said this is actually a people problem, it's not a woman problem. But then it struck me that women, the reason I focused it on women is for two reasons. One is I noticed that women they seem to neglect themselves when it comes to self-care and self-love in a very integrated way, right? The second thing that I have noticed is most of the places in most of the houses, it's the women who are responsible for actioning self-care, health related practices in the house or for their families or in their communities. So today we live in a world which, as you very rightly pointed out, that the conversation and the resources available and our access to resources is very disparate. It's not unified. So if I want to deal with something that is mental, I need to go to an emotional. I'm going to one space. If it's the body, I'm going to a total different space. If it's spiritual and mindfulness, I'm going to a third space, right? It's not integrated. But for anybody, how do women who are not only taking care of themselves, but also families and communities, how do they begin to create an integrated approach to well being, self care, and self love? Well, self love is the last because I'm focusing this part on well being and healing and self care in their everyday lives. What suggestions can you offer or practices can you offer for people to just start looking and creating an integrated self-care, well-being, a holistic well-being regimen for themselves and the people around them that they're caring for?
Okay, so before we get to that, let's do a quick look at again Ayurveda and functional medicine, right? So when
Yeah,
we are saying holistic care, Ayurveda says ahar, bihar, sleep, and sex, right?
yeah,
So we're looking at nutrition. Bihar is not just our lifestyle; it includes our work, it includes our exercise, and then
yeah.
sleep. The quantity,
Mm-hmm,
quality, timing, and
mm-hmm,
then sex. How is our ability to have relationships? How is our
mm-hmm,
ability to be free in terms of our sexuality? And I think
mm-hmm.
you and I spoke about this, that how women have become very uncomfortable with their bodies. And you'll be
Right.
surprised, Rekha, that sometimes when I tell women to do certain self-care practices which involve their body parts, which involves their vagina, and they are so uncomfortable to do it,
Yeah,
they feel repulsed by it.
yeah,
So we need to just get the conversation as to what is making making you so uncomfortable with your own body?
Yeah.
Maybe you have gotten used to feeling uncomfortable in the presence of someone else, but you could
Yeah.
love your body as it is when you're on
Yeah.
your own. You don't need to be judged, you're not being watched.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very important to look at that. So ahar, vihar, sleep, and sex when we look at Ayurveda, but when we look through the perspective of functional medicine, we're still looking at sleep, relaxation, exercise, movement, nutrition, hydration, relationships, our ability to have a community of friends, our ability to have resilience to stress. So, how do we integrate all of that into our day? And that is where we need to build our dinacharya, which I just spoke about
Yeah.
earlier. We
Yeah.
need to create a daily routine where we're able to bring in pieces that are helping our body, our mind, and our spirit.
Yeah.
And in terms of healthy food, so I'll tell you a little practice that I integrate. You know that the podcast has a lot of guided meditations, and people have
Yeah.
actually made fun of me for this because they've said, "Do you play and listen to your own voice guiding you through a meditation?" I said, "Yes, I do." So in the
Yeah.
afternoon, it's not because I love hearing my voice. I also play my husband's. I play one of mine, one of his. But I take a pause. So every day, in the middle of my work day, I take a 20-minute pause. I lie down on the floor of my office. I put my earpiece and I do a guided meditation. How
Yeah.
simple is that, right? You don't have to
Yeah.
take time out, set up a meditation somewhere. And when we look at sleep, I would probably put sleep up there as self love.
Yeah.
And timing varies for everybody because some people have told me you go to bed at 7 o'clock, and by the way, Rekha, you kept me past my bedtime today, and only for you.
Thank you.
So I go to bed at 7 p.m. almost every day, and I'll tell you why. So, for the about 20 years, I drove around and I had about 5-6 hours of sleep every night. And when that changed and I switched to working virtually, I said, let me see what does my body need when I don't set an alarm. So, I stopped
Yeah.
setting an alarm and I found that my body needed 9 to 10 hours of sleep, and that is
Mm.
where I thrive during the day. So if you need to wake up early to take care of your spouse, family, or kids, dial your
Yeah.
bedtime back and make sure that you are getting the right timing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to be ideally waking up without an alarm, which is going to tell you, like Zen
Yeah.
Buddhism, that you've got enough sleep, your body has received the nurture that it has deserved. Right.
Yeah.
And then when we want to look at foods, you asked a lot about the inflammatory body earlier. So just kind of, even if we don't want to go down radical diets, and I'll say this as well, Rika, because a lot of people first jump into very fancy
Yeah.
diets like
Yeah.
keto and
Yeah.
paleo, and you don't need to do that. You need to simply be cleaning up the diet of the processed foods, the rubbish
Yeah.
that is available out there. You don't
Yeah.
need to be going down. An Indian does not need to go down a path of keto either for weight loss or for anything else. An
Mm.
Indian can very well choose to eat Indian and have our local foods, but just done the right way so that you bring the body back to a state of balance. And there are people who can lose up to 20-30 kilos easily just from removing inflammatory foods without
Mm.
calculating calories, cutting portions, and
Mm.
making food very unhealthy where you're looking at how much can you eat.
Right, right. I know we started with food and information, but I have to tell you right now the word on my mind is sex. And I am so glad. No, really, I am
Let's talk
so
about sex.
we really do need to talk about this. I am so glad that you are referencing Ayurveda and ancient wisdom to say that sex is a very, very important aspect of our well-being. And I think this is
Yes.
something that many of us, we don't even talk about sex. We don't even talk about pleasure. We don't talk about the biological needs of the body, right? that's how, but that's a whole different conversation. And I think you and I should really get down and have that
But
conversation
hold
at
on,
some
Rekha.
time.
I know, but I do want to tell you one thing in the context of sex. Now, Ayurveda doesn't necessarily say that you need to be targeting a specific number of days. So, if you come across in the West, there's a lot of reference to couples, healthy couples should be having sex three
Yeah,
times a week. And
yeah,
that's not what Ayurveda says, because excess release of sexual fluid is also linked to reduction in ojas, and
yeah,
ojas is actually what we say vitality or immunity. And
yeah,
today we're talking about another taboo topic, which is vaccination, and we're talking about vaccination to protect ourselves from a virus. But if you go back to Ayurveda, it will still say that if your ojas is strong, your ability to fight any virus, any pathogen is highly increased. We are depleting our ojas through so many things, through
yeah,
overusing of our senses, through
yeah,
unnatural multitasking, and not prioritizing taking care of
yeah,
ourselves and showing
yeah,
our body, mind, and spirit love. So I
yeah.
think sex is something that we should be talking about as a full conversation, maybe. But
Agree,
there is
agree.
so many intricacies to the topic of sex from the context of ancient wisdom and functional medicine or modern medicine.
Okay, Deepa, I'm scheduling you for another conversation just to talk about sex. Okay. By the way, Pearl has joined us and she says we have to love our own body and not rely on others for validation. She also says, I am so glad you're bringing up sex. It's such a taboo topic. I 200% I agree with you, Pearl. I think it's time we
Yes.
started talking about it because how do we take care of ourselves holistically? How do we take care of our body, mind, and spirit if we are not willing to talk? If we are editing our conversations and we are editing our needs, right? So I think we have had a very long, very deep conversation. I'm sorry, there is a question that Uday brought up much earlier, which I promised him that you would take
Oh.
on down the line. The question was, before you began practicing yoga, have you ever mistaken yoga as a normal exercise, like stretching your body or doing some abdominal exercise?
No, luckily, thanks to the blessings or thanks to fortitude, I always had great teachers who always brought attention to the holistic aspect of yoga.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
remember, Rekha, that I started teaching yoga 20 years ago when yoga was
yeah,
considered useless. So I had friends who'd look at me when I said yoga teacher and say that, what are you wasting your life? I mean, what the hell are you
yeah,
doing with your life?
yeah,
Today,
yeah.
yoga has become very fancy. It's a fad. Everyone is wants to be associated with yoga and teaching, but it was not the case 20 years ago.
I
And I
agree.
used to say that my only students were middle-aged, pot-bellied men at that time, uh, and it was really hard to get people excited about yoga. And so I mean, my husband lived in the Himalayas for in the cave with his master, so we are steeped in the whole practice of yoga as lineage tradition, and it
Yeah,
has
yeah.
nothing to do with anything but a holistic. We got married to each other because we believe there is a yogic connection, and it's really
Absolutely.
way beyond yoga as the Instagram yogis and yoginis.
No, Deepa, I agree 200%. I learned yoga when I was 10 years old with my grandmother at the Shivananda ashram. I think you and I have spoken about that connection. And
Yes,
every time I practiced, every time I felt I needed that learning, I've always gone back to the ashram. Somehow, I think
yes.
you are the only other person I've actually even attended a couple of sessions with in the yoga nidra, but I would never go to I would never go to a studio for yoga. I would really pay a lot of attention to the lineage of the Acharya because it's really about your body, mind, and spirit. And it's only when you go through that practice that you understand it, right? So Suparna says, fantastic conversation. She is enjoyed it thoroughly. And I think we are like top of the hour. I already feel guilty for keeping you away from your bed. But thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a fantastic conversation. I feel there's like still so much more we have to unpack. Maybe we
Yes,
will we
yes,
will down the line, because I think there's just so much. We try to cram too much.
yes.
But Deepa, just in case some of the visitors who are, some of the visitors to this video later on, or even our listeners right now want to connect with you, want to get in touch with you, how do they reach out to you? Where do they find you?
My website www.phytothrive.com, phytothrive.com,
Okay,
or my podcast, the Sleep Whisperer podcast, where any episode has all the information on how to connect, including my own email there. So, I mean,
right.
anyone going to a single episode will have access to all that information.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Also, just so everybody knows, in the post that I made the announcement about this conversation, Deepa's Facebook pages, Phytothrive and the Sleep Whisperer, are tagged. So if you find any part of this conversation resonates, please do look up Deepa's work on both of these pages. I promise you, I mean, if this past 1 hour hasn't shown you, Deepa does have a lot of depth. She's doing some cutting edge work in the area of healing and well-being, and we can only benefit from that. So I want to thank everybody who has joined us today. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for keeping the questions rolling. We are very, very grateful. And Deepa, again, thank you so much. As a friend, as I've said, I just enjoy talking to you. We can talk for hours. Having seen your work, I'm truly very honored that you agreed to join me. Thank you very much. If you have any last words, the floor is yours.
No, Rika, thank you again. I'm really humbled, honored that you called me here today. And as you rightly said, that we have so much more to explore, and it's the two of us. And maybe it should start when we talk about sex, as we just started to hint into today. And that is a huge area. And it's really not about just giggling and laughing, as a lot of people tend to do. That's a
Yeah,
pertinent area, because
yeah,
a lot of repressed emotions are linked to unhealthy sexuality.
yes,
Your immunity is linked to sexuality, which the
yeah,
age old yogis and Ayurveds very well knew that ojas and sex are very much linked. Otherwise, you wouldn't have an entire pillar of Ayurveda called as sexuality. So,
right.
there's so much to do with physiology, psychology, spirituality. We should probably talk about
Yes.
psychology, spirituality, and physiology in the context of sexuality. So,
Ooh,
thank you
love
for
it.
having me here, and it was an utter pleasure. As I said, I'm so strict about bedtime, and you have the only one who's crept into that area and got away with it.
I'm going to try my luck one more time, hopefully soon, to talk about the sexuality one, because that conversation's now simmering at the back of my mind.
Yes.
For now, I think we are on top of the hour. This has been a long talk, and again, thank you everybody. Please remember, we will be back next Friday at 7 p.m. with yet another conversation from the trenches.